thank you for joining us for the fifth workshop of Walking in Their Shoes. And for this fifth workshop, we are focusing on immigrants and refugees. And so I have here Marsha Hirsch. She's with Carolina Refugee Resettlement Agency in Charlotte. And so, Marsha, thank you so much for being here and agreeing to meet with me. And maybe you could just tell us a little bit about the agency and the services that you all provide.
Sure. Well, thank you for the invitation. I appreciate that. Carolina Refugee Resettlement Agency has been in operation since the mid-1990s. And the purpose of the organization is to receive refugees who have been processed through the United Nations and then vetted and approved by the U.S. State Department to enter the country with refugee status, which is a specific legal designation. So with that designation comes a set of services that the State Department requires of resettlement offices like mine. So HIAS presents cases to CRA for families to arrive in Charlotte. And then once we've accepted those cases, we're anticipating their arrival. We're responsible for acquiring housing, having the apartment set up with a checklist of items, furnishings, toiletries, personal items of various nature, cleaning supplies. There's a good list of things that are necessary for the initial move-in. We should also have a variety of staff or community members available who speak the languages of refugees. And so that's the sort of the foundation of prepping for them. And then we're going to pick families up at the airport, bring them back to this new apartment. And then from that point, we're in a 90-day process with them where we are assisting them with various paperwork, like obtaining a Social Security card, applying for basic state benefits like food stamps and temporary Medicaid. If there's children, we enroll them into the public school system. The parents will have cultural orientations and be enrolled into ESL classes. They will meet with our employment manager and prepare for a first job. So the resettlement program is rather quick, that 90-day period. And then from that point, people are going to be financially responsible for themselves. So that first initial job is very important to get people in the position to kind of take the reins on their own finances. And then after that, 90 days is a bit quick. So there is the Department of Health and Human Services at the federal level. In that giant department is the Office of Refugee Resettlement, or ORR. Now, you may have heard ORR in the news. They have a variety of responsibilities, but one of them is to provide programming and funding post-resettlement, anytime after that 90 days and up to 5 years. So we have ongoing employment programs, social adjustment, intensive medical case management. We have programming to help support people when it's time for citizenship. So there can be any number of circumstances where clients might return to the office during the course of that 5-year period for additional support. Mm-hmm. And why 5 years? Because at the 5-year mark, people are eligible for naturalization to become American citizens.
So what are some of the challenges that you guys are seeing right now as far as immigrants and refugees?
Well, I think in this particular moment in time, the key issue for us is housing, as is the case for, all kinds of people across the country. So as I mentioned at the beginning, one of our first requirements is that we acquire an apartment. And for many years, we had a number of privately owned apartment complexes that were partnered with us. So when we called and said there was an arrival, if they had an apartment, they would say sure, and we would have a very minimal deposit to pay. The refugees themselves don't have Social Security cards yet. They're not going to pass a credit check. So getting a dispensation from property owners to allow refugees to move in was something that we just, I guess, looking back on it now, we sort of took it for granted that that those property owners locally in Charlotte would work with us for, almost 2 decades. But there's definitely been a shift that I could notice a couple of years ago, where some of the apartment companies, properties were sold to national entities. And so these new corporations were not interested in working with us or offering the dispensations that refugee resettlement inherently needs. And so we started to see the shrinking of our options for calls to complexes. I mean, the intention of the refugee resettlement program is, self-sufficiency. Now, self-sufficiency itself, I think, has a lot of meanings at different moments in time. There's self-sufficiency at 90 days, that you can pay your bills and rent, your children are in school, you have a job. Maybe self-sufficiency later means that you have gotten a driver's license and you own a car and you have more personal mobility. Maybe 3, 4, 5 years later, it means you're able to buy a home. So that idea kind of can shift as people move forward and, adjust to living in the US. But self-sufficiency on the front end is being able to pay those bills and so forth.
What are some other obstacles or adversity that you consistently see immigrants and refugees having to face as they're coming over to the States?
Well, I think it's kind of similar to a lot of people in the United States. The layers of technology that have been built into our society. I mean, I can say for myself, if I have to set up one more secret password, my head's going to explode, but I know I'll have to set one up today, right? It's going to happen. So I think that digital literacy piece, while it's hard for even the average American over the past 5 to 10 years to sort of shift gears and have that embedded into our daily life, depending on what part of the world people have come from, while they may be familiar with using, particularly younger people will be familiar with using smartphones and probably have Facebook accounts and things like that, that's fine, but we can also understand that our lives revolve around email accounts and links and passwords, and so cyber security issues, all these things are a big change in how people from other parts of the world are normally functioning.
Well, Marsha, thank you so much for meeting with me and just kind of walking us through what your agency does and the services that you all are offering, and just some of the adversity and the challenges that people have to face when they're trying to resettle in the States.
Well, thank you for inviting me and taking the time to learn about this topic.
So I would like to introduce someone to you by the name of Thakur. And he has a very interesting story of just resettling in the United States, also working with the Carolina Resettlement Agency in Charlotte. And so I will just let him share his story a little bit.
So, thank you for this opportunity. My name is Thakur Mishra, and I'm originally from a small country in Asia called Bhutan. All of a sudden, in 1989, the government enacted what was called as a one nation, one people policy, and my family was not part of the one people. That is because we spoke a different language, we had a different religion than the ruling Buddhist elite. In 1991, I still remember that when we were eating lunch, a dozen security armed personnel burst into our 2-story house, and they arrested my father. They took him away, accusing him of being a terrorist. I know that I was too young to understand what was unfolding politically, but I guess I was old enough as a nearly 8-year-old to understand that my father was not a terrorist, but just a breadwinner in our extended family. He spent his days in prison for 91 days. On the 90th day of his imprisonment, he was forced at gunpoint to sign what was called a a voluntary migration form. The form was written in a language he did not understand. So what he signed later, he found that he agreed at one point to leave the country within 7 days. And as he got released from the prison, we did not have any choice but to flee Bhutan.
So you all were forced to leave Bhutan and then just kind of resettled in India. What happened after that?
Initially, when refugees flee their country, technically they usually end up in another bordering country, but in our context, India was not willing to accept us for whatever reason. And we were dumped in another small country called Nepal. In the refugee camp in Nepal, we stayed there for close to 20 years. Now, for someone who has never been to a refugee camp, I was living in a nearly 200 square feet of space with 10 other people, some of my siblings, their children, my parents. And then it's a tent-like hut, basically, that's made up of bamboo and plastic. And during the monsoon winter, you would still get soaked, despite the fact that you would have roof over your head. And I studied up to grade 10 inside refugee camp school, unfortunately, even without a pair of shoes on my feet, because my family could not afford for one. And after I was done with studying until 10th grade in the refugee camp, I studied my higher secondary education from outside of the refugee camp school because it was a common practice back then. There is no security in the refugee camp. There is no safety. There is no labs in the school. There is no better medical treatment, medical facilities in the refugee camp. I still remember that during the initial settlement of the refugee camp, I lost my grandmother and a 2-year-old niece because they were succumbed to pneumonia, and then they were not able to receive any kind of treatment.
And about how many people do you think were living in that entire camp?
Approximately 120,000 people were living in 7 different refugee camps in Nepal.
Wow, that's a huge number. So what happened after you decided to leave the refugee camp?
So, I mean, as we continue to live in the refugee camp without any hope for better tomorrow, all of a sudden in 2007, the United States government announced that it was willing to absorb in about 60,000 Bhutanese refugees, or maybe even more than that. So as soon the news came, I mean, I started thinking like that could be a life turning point in my life, a turning point in my life. So I immediately declared my interest with the UN's agency and told them like I would like to get resettled. I don't care where in the US, but I just like to get out of the refugee camp. So I was first from the family to be actually resettled. I came alone in the Bronx in New York City. It took me full 2 years for me to be done with the resettlement process overseas. It has to do with layers and layers of screenings, interviews, vetting process, medical clearance, security clearance. And once everything was cleared in like 2 years, I finally stepped my toe in the Bronx in New York City.
And so you stepped foot in the Bronx, and then what was your journey like in the United States when you were granted access to come over and resettle?
Having lived in the refugee camp for such a long time, and then being resettled in one of the world's largest cities was in itself very shocking. But then I kept thinking that, once I am here, then I have the liberty to move wherever I want. And then somebody, somewhere, I'm not sure whether somebody told me this before I left Nepal or maybe after I came to the US, that somebody said a slogan that if you live in the New York City for a year, you could live anywhere in the world very easily. So I kept holding on to that belief. It was extremely challenging initially, but then the hope for a better tomorrow just kept me moving forward. So I got married, shared an apartment with another friend because I had left my own apartment. So we stayed there as a newlywed couple, sharing an apartment with another family for about a week. And then we came to Raleigh in North Carolina, where one of my other best friends was living there with his wife. So he was kind enough to let me in to share one of his apartment. And then he taught me how to drive there, including he actually ended up buying a car for me. And then in 2011, then I ended up moving here in Charlotte.
Okay.
And joined the Carolina Refugee Resettlement Agency then, and I have been working there since then.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it sounds like the Carolina Resettlement Refugee Agency was a pretty good ally for you as well when you came to Charlotte.
Yes. And the only reason why I have worked there for such a long time and my passion working with people is that I always feel like I can, as a former refugee myself, being resettled and then now working as a case manager, I always feel like I can walk in the shoes of many of the clients that are being resettled here in Charlotte.
Right. You can understand their story firsthand and really just kind of know what they're going through and what they were going through that led them to want to leave their country of origin and resettle in the States.
Exactly.
Well, and could you just share a little bit about what it means or how your life changes when you become a naturalized citizen?
Oh, I guess I have taken that in a very modest way. Becoming a naturalized citizen for me is that now I have a place to call home, a place where I can practice religion of my own choice, a place where I can pursue my dreams proudly, a place where I can participate in the democracy freely, a place where I feel like this is my only home, despite the fact that my own birth country was not willing to consider me as a citizen only when I was 7.5 years old. You could imagine what have I done as a child. So my country that was supposed to protect me ended up evicting me. So now I feel like I have a second chance in life because I have become a naturalized citizen. And I was extremely proud actually to participate in the democratic process here, including in 2 presidential elections. That's what it means more to me. And I have found over the years that, people here take things for granted. It means that now that I am naturalized, I won't take anything for granted.
Well, I appreciate you sharing your story with all of us. And if there was any bit of information or suggestions that you could offer to someone who might be trying to resettle or someone who's trying to support another individual that's trying to resettle in the United States, what sort of advice would you offer?
A couple of things that people should understand, that refugees come here not to seize opportunities. I have seen in many cases where refugees rather create employment for so many people as they continue to work. I know a lot of my former clients who own restaurants, who does real estate business and all this kind of thing, and they employ hundreds of people with them. So the myth that these refugees come here to grab opportunities and or to be dependent on the social benefits sort of forever, that's not true. That's a myth. These people will receive benefit only for ranging from a couple of months to maybe a year or 2. But then they don't get the benefit forever, like it's been portrayed in some of the media. They are human beings who do not have a place to call home. And that once they are resettled here, all they want is a roof over their head, food on their table, and a second chance in their life. So they would do everything and anything in their power to continue to work as much hard as they can, just to make a living. and make differences in other people's life. That's the first thing. The second thing is I would try to be friends with some of the former refugees who have arrived here and listen to their stories without any kind of judgment. Be friends with them. Don't force them to tell their story. But if someone is willing, just listen to their stories to get a feel of how horrible or how horrific life they have lived overseas. And having this, passion of opening up arms and then becoming more welcoming towards these refugees could be one of our greatest strengths as an individual. And if people really want to get involved locally, they are always more than welcome to either volunteer at a local resettlement agency or makes either in kind or cash donation to these local resettlement agencies so they could maximize their services.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice. I think that you're right in saying that so many people have this certain viewpoint, a prejudice, I guess you could say, about why someone is trying to resettle in the United States. There's this stereotype or a stigma that says people are just going to move here to mooch off the government and resources. And I think what you're sharing is that that's not actually the case. In most cases, people are seeking safety and protection and just seeking a second opportunity in their life to provide for their family and to have a livelihood that they can really be sustained with.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, Thakur, thank you so much for joining me this morning and just making time to share your story and your experience. I know we certainly appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
The next person that we'll hear from is a gentleman by the name of and has an interesting story as he left his country of origin, Turkey, and sought out citizenship in the United States. And so we'll listen to his story and just hear what that process has been like. Thank you so much for agreeing to speak with me this afternoon. I know that it can be an act of courage to kind of share your story on a public platform like this. And so just thank you for doing that and for sharing your experience and your story with us. And so maybe you could help us to learn a little bit about why you left Turkey and what that process has been like.
Thank you. I'm grateful for you for having me in this study. As you mentioned, I am originally from Turkey, and I grew up there. I studied my college education, and after that, I came to here for my master's study. After that, I returned back to my country and worked there for more than 10 years. The fundamental reason for me leaving Turkey is the circumstances that became bad and even got worse. After 10 years, the current regime in Turkey got strength, and they kind of moved towards oppression and authoritarianism. So the freedom, all kinds of freedom, not only freedom of speech, but also freedom to invest or freedom of belief, whatever, they kind of pressurized people, and they destroyed everything. Fundamental, the measure or fundamental criteria of democracy was even crashed. So not only myself, but hundreds of thousands of people are leaving Turkey, and most of them are very well educated. They have professions.
Could you speak to maybe some of the experiences or instances of oppression that you or your family endured?
In 2016, there had been a failed coup attempt in Turkey, and the current regime took advantage of that coup attempt, and they immediately declared state of emergency nationwide. And it actually still is in power. So they can detain people anytime they want. They can arrest people, or they can arrest anybody they would like to. Today, there are like very prominent journalists or people from different professions who are in jail.
And so you were in the United States for some years pursuing education and then returned to Turkey. And then what motivated you to return to the United States?
So this is a great question, and this is a question that most immigrants face actually. Uh, when you stay long enough in a country other than your nation of origin, things are becoming more difficult as you stay longer. For instance, when we first came here, our oldest kid was 15, and he's now 21. And our smallest one was 4, and she's now 10. So if we stay more years, they will be here. We can comfortably say that they grew up here, and they don't know anywhere other than the United States, and United States becomes their natural home.
So it sounds like there's two issues that you kind of come up against when you stay in the United States for an extended amount of time. The one being that you are kind of assimilated to the culture of the United States. So it's hard to return to the culture of Turkey and kind of assimilate back into that lifestyle. And then the other issue being that the longer someone stays in the United States, if you return to Turkey or the country of origin, then you're kind of alienated. You're kind of labeled, and there's a stigma attached to your name.
And in some cases, in some instances, the country of origin, the power there simply does not accept you. They think that you are kind of westernized, so you are not a member of that society anymore. They perceive that. For instance, in some countries where the conditions are worse, it is the typical situation. The authoritarian regimes easily label people as terrorists or as traitors, because that is the source of their legitimacy.
Which is interesting, because when you come over here to the United States, well, you're kind of labeled the same way, right? You come up against this stigma as a foreigner, perhaps a terrorist, and kind of have to live that down.
When we first came here, there was a kind of fundamentalist wave in some parts of the United States. We have never witnessed that, but I heard some stories.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for sharing all this, and for just your willingness to open up about your story and your experience. I think that this will just help us to increase awareness of what immigrants and refugees face when they're coming over to the United States, and how we might be able to assist them and support them a little bit better in that transition.
I hope it helps. Thank you for giving me this opportunity, and I'm very grateful for you for having me in the study. Thank you.
So I have Sandra Jacobs here with me this afternoon, and Sandra is a close friend to the family, and she has a pretty interesting story. She migrated to the States when she was a little bit younger, and so I thought that we would have her share her story with you. So Sandra, how old were you when you started to migrate to the United States?
I was exactly 21 years old. I became, in March, became 21 years old, and I came to the United States. It was September 3rd.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I mean, the main reason was because I wanted to have a better future, and, you know, I had some friends that they had already come here, and they were all saying, you know, wonderful things. I wanted to go to school too, but that was not possible at that time.
So what was that process like when you were coming to the States?
Well, I mean, I was...
Because you came from Argentina, so you born in Argentina and were there until you were 21.
Yeah, my entire life I never had any idea to go anywhere. I thought I was gonna just live there my whole life. But of course, when you start like growing up and seeing stuff and all that, you change your mind. Well, they asked for many, 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 many papers, but it took me 12 years to get it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what was that 12 years like?
It was scary at times, and there were other times where you didn't even feel it because I was allowed. I was free. I didn't do anything wrong, so
Right.
I could go places. But most of anything, I was like driving everywhere. I couldn't fly. Yes, and then a lot of papers, and you have, especially me being Spanish, I have everything, all my documents, everything in Spanish. You have to translate, have an official translator. It costs money. The lawyer to do all the papers for.
Right.
Yeah, I was lucky enough that I did it myself. I did all the papers, everything myself, but I couldn't translate. I couldn't sign the same papers that, with my name. It has to be an official translator. But the lawyers cost pretty good money. I mean, it is a lot of money because I remember my husband, I'm talking about 27 years ago, it was about $5,000. You cannot pay the lawyer monthly. They charge you like half today and half when you have it. So that was another big thing. I don't know today. I have no idea how much it may cost. But if it was that much back then,
Right.
I cannot imagine how much is right now.
How much more?
Yeah, it's right
inflated
now.
it's become. Yeah. Do you feel like there's any sort of stigma or discrimination or prejudices that you've come face to face with, even now that you're a citizen, just because your native tongue isn't English, or just because you do speak with an accent, so people can quickly identify, oh, this is not, an American.
Yeah. Yes, I do. As soon as they hear an accent, not everybody. I mean, there's a lot of people that they like to hear your story, just like you, know, and they ask you and they want to know how is my country, what I did over there, why I came, all the things, but there's a lot of other people that, when they hear your accent, their attitude changes because I may not look, like a foreign, but as soon as I speak, they know. And, over the phone, like if I want to get a service or something that it is always hard. And, and I have here, and many times they have told me, go back home, which, to me, this is home. I'm going to get emotional now. This is home because I have lived most of my life in this country. My daughter is here and she went to school here. She became a PA, which is a great thing. I think she's a great kid. She's very educated, very nice human being. So I think that was a plus for this country to have her here, Yeah. So sometimes when things like this happen, before people used to think like, you live by yourself, you have a house all on your own, you don't have anybody else, you're not renting a room. They always think that because you are a foreign, you don't have the opportunity, or you don't have the willing to go and get something for yourself. You always have to be like living like 10 people in one house, Yeah. So that's a misconception that they also have, like, oh, you live in a house by yourself, you know? So things like that, I mean, I don't know if they bother me now because I'm just so far. And also I have my daughter, whenever I have a problem or an issue with that, I always ask her to help me write an email or so do it in the right way so people won't get, the idea right away that, oh, she's not American, so we don't really care about helping or doing, some stuff that I may need.
Right, or that you're entitled to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because we do pay taxes.
Yeah. You're a law-abiding citizen. You are a citizen.
Yes.
So, and this is your home.
Yes.
This is your newer home. You've been here a long time, though.
Yeah, I feel that way, And I'm proud to be an American. I'm very proud. I mean, this country had given me so much, and I did work very hard. We all worked very hard, and I took the opportunity the best way that I could, and I knew how. So I'm happy, I'm proud, and I think, that I have given this country a lot of stuff, including part of my life.
Yeah.
So, I'm happy. This is my country too.
Thank you for sharing your story.
No
It takes
problem.
a lot of courage
Yeah.
to share it openly and authentically the way that you did.
Yeah.
So I appreciate
And
it.
without crying.
Yes. At Unity, our greatest hope in creating the manse and overhauling that space was so that we would be able to house an immigrant or a refugee in that space rent-free for a year as they try to continue to assimilate to America. And I know that we hope to have a family in that house in the near future, and to just continue to be an ally and a support for those who are immigrating to the United States.